Alrighty, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Wuxia Wednesdays. I am your martial brother Fraggith, and today we're going to be reading more from A Hero Born, Legend of the Condor Heroes, Book 1 by Jin Yong. Previously on, uh, our boy Guo Jing was, he was tested by someone who came over uh, from Qiu Chuji, another Taoist, came over. I forget his name offhand. The guy who swung by. He'll come back, so remembering his voice will be difficult. But basically, he tests Guo Jing to see how far his martial arts talents have progressed. Also, to check in with the seven freaks of the South, who are now six, um, to see if they actually found their person. Also, just to generally tell them, yeah, no, the fight is still very much on in like 2 years. So the clock's ticking, and Guo Jing is well. It turns out he's not quite up to par. He takes a serious hit to his self confidence, and his training kind of stalls out, sadly. Um, Partly because his shifus collectively are not the best teachers in the world. Like they know how to do their individual tricks, they know a bunch of the basics, but they don't really know how to teach someone like Guo Jing, who's honestly just slow to pick up on the fundamentals. So they're having difficulty getting him up to speed to be able to do things, but they do have a bunch of different skills to teach him, and he is making some headway. Like, but he's not really up to par just yet. Fortunately, he meets a mysterious, unnamed, I think another Taoist actually, who tells him, "Hey, meet me at the top of this cliff at midnight, and I'll teach you some tricks." Um, and Guo Jing is like, "Well, that kind of feels like cheating, um, but I don't really have anything to lose." And so he does manage to go up there at some point. It's a difficult cliff to climb, and he gets a little help from the guy. And the guy teaches him how to sleep. And Guo Jing is like, "I, I mean, also how to breathe and a few other things." So he is teaching him something, but Guo Jing is like, "I don't really understand what the purpose of all this is." Um, but okay, thanks for being a buddy, I guess. Um, and he's like, uh, you don't tell the seven heroes of the South that this is happening. You don't tell them. They will not be pleased. Um, and he's like, okay, I got it. They would probably be mortified. So, also the titular condors have showed up. Um, so there were two big, giant white condors that were fighting off a swarm of smaller black condors, eagles, what have you. And they both die ultimately and leave behind two chicks. And so Guo Jing and Kojin, the Kojin is the daughter of Genghis Khan, Temujin, uh, eventually to be Genghis Khan. Have I mentioned that there's a lot? There's a lot. Um, a lot happens in any given chapter. These are wild. These are a wild ride. Um, anyway, so this that's actually how Guo Jing meets this mysterious um, Taoist old dude, and he's like, okay, yeah, no, I can save them, and he just kind of scampers on up this cliffside, and Guo Jing is like, wow, how did you do that? And he's like, I could teach you how to do that, so swing by at midnight. I forgot my order of operations. I apologize. It's been a week. It's been a long week. Anyway, that more or less catches us up. I don't think there was anything happening on Lily Lee's, not Lily Lee, Charity Bow's end. There is going to be more on her and what's going on with Wanyan Honglie in a bit, other than the fact that Wanyan Honglie has been over with his brother, another prince of the Song Dynasty, right? Or are they the Hans? I should really get that straight. I'm sorry, I know I have this question every time, so I apologize. Let's see. No, 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 that's not them. Prince of Zhao of the Song. No, he is of the Han Dynasty, right? No, he's the Jin Empire. Sorry. So, Wanyan Honglie, who has kind of absconded slash kidnapped Charity Bao in thanks for saving his life. More on that later. That is going to be a fairly dramatic turning point, plot point. Things that like, and I'm thinking ahead in terms of like the subsequent books. A lot goes down. This is pretty wild drama. It's pretty great. Um, so yeah, with that, I'm starting much later than I would have liked to, because this is kind of a longer chunk this week. But we will try and endeavor to get through it in a timely fashion. So that gets us basically caught up. Yeah, let's get rocking and a rolling. Right. Yes, I believe that is, yikes, that is a pretty long chunk. Well, we'll see how far we get. We will try and get through it. If it winds up being, by a certain point in time, we haven't made the progress we like, we might have to cut it off early, but it'll be okay. At any rate, sit back, relax, do some Neigong breathing exercises, and yeah, enjoy continued reading from A Hero Born. Chapter 6, Combat at the Cliff. 1. After lunch, Guo Jing went to the freak's ger. Guo Jing, show me your split mountain palm, Gildan Quan said. In here? Indeed. Potential enemies are everywhere. You have to practice fighting in confined spaces. Gildan Quan feigned a left and struck with his right. Ke Zhene sat and listened. As custom dictated, Guo Jing was waiting until his Shifu's fourth move before launching his riposte. Gildan Quan was swift and relentless, and suddenly struck at the vital point on Guo Jing's chest with both palms in an enter the tiger's lair. Sorry. Okay, let's try the sentence again. Gildan Quan was swift and relentless, and suddenly struck at the vital point on Guo Jing's chest with both palms in an enter the tiger's lair. They were no longer practicing. His Shifu was trying to hurt him. Guo Jing retreated in shock, and within moments had his back against the ger's felt walls. Instinct now took over. He hooked his left arm and blocked Gildan Quan's attack. Gildan Quan's fists were still placed on Guo Jing's torso, but the young man was as soft as cotton, and before Quan realized what was happening, he had been propelled backward. His arms tingled, and he stumbled. Guo Jing stared at his master and then knelt on both knees. I have been foolish. I will accept my sixth Shifu's punishment. Flustered, he could not think what he had done. He could not think what he had done. Oh, yeah, no, I'm reading it correctly. Never mind. Flustered, he could not think what he had done to make his master try to hurt him in such a way. Hurt him in such a way. I apologize, I'm fumbling over my words here. The freaks stood around him with grave expressions on their faces. You have been training with someone else in secret. Why didn't you tell us? If your sixth Shifu had not confronted you... Oh, I don't know who's saying that. Oh, it's supposed to be Zhu Kong. I apologize. You've been training with someone else in secret. Why didn't you tell us? If your sixth Shifu had not confronted you, how long would you have continued to lie to us? Master Jebe teaches me to use the bow and arrow, that's all. Still you lie to us? Zhu Kong was furious. I wouldn't dare lie to my Shifus. Tears shone in his eyes. Then who taught you this Nagong inner strength? Now you are supported by this powerful master, you disrespect us? Nagong? I don't know any Nagong. Pah! Zhu Kong spat. He jabbed his finger 2 inches below the boy's ribs, at the turtle-dove tail acupressure point, which, if hit, results in an immediate loss of consciousness. Guo Jing was too scared to dodge it, so he stood stiff like a tree. But 2 years of training with the Taoist with 3 buns had produced results, even if he did not realize it. Those are hair buns, I trust. His muscles contracted and then pushed away his master's finger. It hurt, but he felt no other effect. Zhu Kong had not used all his strength, but there was no doubt that Guo Jing had used Neigong to rebuff the move. Are you still trying to tell me you don't know Neigong? Zhu Kong snarled, as the world burns. I don't know if you guys can hear whatever the hell's going on out there. I should probably close the window. It's pretty bad. That's 2 ambulances and a fire truck. Okay, well, car accidents. Fun. Where were we? Ah, yes. Are you still trying to tell me you don't know Neigong? Zhu Kong snarled. Could the Taoist have been teaching me Neigong? Guo Jing asked himself. For 2 years, someone has been instructing me in breathing techniques to aid my sleep, but he never taught me any martial arts. I thought it was just for fun. He told me never to tell anyone. It didn't seem to be doing any harm to my training. Guo Jing began to kowtow. But I know now I was wrong. I will never meet with him again. The freaks looked at each other. You didn't realize this was Neigong? Jade Han asked. I don't really know what Neigong is. He just told me to sit, breathe, and empty my mind. To think of how the qi travels around my body. It was hard at first, until recently, when it began to feel like there was a warm little mouse running around in there. It feels so strange. Fortunately, the emptying of his mind was probably easy. In one respect, the 6 freaks of the South were delighted and rather surprised that he had achieved such proficiency in just 2 years. But he was a simple young boy with few thoughts to distract him. It was no doubt easier for him to clear his mind than someone of intelligence and wit. Zhu Kong had long given up on their reading lessons. Who is this teacher? Zhu Kong asked. He didn't want me to tell you. He said that my Shifu's kung fu is as accomplished as his, so he has nothing to teach me. He says I am not his student, and he is not my master. He made me promise not to describe what he looks like to anyone. This only made the freaks more curious. At first they had assumed Guo Jing had run into a fellow wanderer of the Wu Lin by chance, but there seemed to be something else going on. Zhu Kong gestured for Guo Jing to leave. I promise I won't meet him again. I won't go tonight. Now, listen to me. You will keep practicing Neigong with him. We aren't angry with you. You go tonight, but don't tell him we know. Guo Jing nodded and left, happy that his masters did not blame him. He pulled open the door to the ger and saw Kojin standing outside with the two condors by her side. They were fully grown, majestic birds by now, almost as tall as her. Casual reminder, they've been described as carrying away sheep. They are big, big birds. Like a Quetzalcoatlus. Huge. Sorry.
Come, I've been waiting for you for ages.
One of the birds flew up and hovered on Guo Jing's shoulder. I just tamed a horse. It can really run. I'm not sure if he'll let you ride him.
Then I'll kill him,
Kojin replied. I won't let you. They joined hands and ran to play with the birds and their horses. The six freaks, meanwhile, were deliberating their next move. He has taught Guo Jing well. There can be no malicious intent, surely, Jade Han said.
Then why doesn't he want us to know? And why didn't he explain to the boy what he was teaching him?
Gildan Quan contended.
I'm afraid we may know him, Zhu Kong said.
Know him? If he's not a friend, then he must be an enemy, Jade Han said.
None of our friends possess such superior Negong Kung Fu,
Gildan Quan muttered. If he is our enemy, then why teach Guo Jing his skills? Jade Han said.
Maybe it is all part of some devilish plan.
Kejene's words sent a shiver through the other freaks.
Six Brother and I will follow Guo Jing tonight and find out who he is, Zhu Kong said.
The others nodded their approval. That night, Zhu Kong and Gildan Quan hid themselves outside Guo Jing's mother's ger, where they waited for over an hour. Then it came. Ma, I'm leaving. Guo Jing appeared in the doorway and left. He was moving quickly, and within moments he was far ahead. With no trees to block their view out on the grasslands, they could follow at a safe distance. He arrived at the bottom of the cliff and, without stopping, began to climb. Guo Jing was now able to ascend to the top without help from the Taoist. Zhu Kong and Gildan Quan watched in astonishment, not knowing what to say. Before long, the other freaks arrived. They had brought their weapons with them. Zhu Kong told them Guo Jing was already at the top.
We can't get up there,
Jade Han said, gazing up at the clouds which had since swallowed up the summit.
Let's hide in the bushes and wait for them to descend,
Keijene said. Jade Han recalled their fight 12 years previously with Twice Foul Dark Wind. They had hidden in the bushes then as now. A cutting wind had been blowing that night too. The moon's cold light, the large expanse of desert sand, the lonely hill, the occasional neighing of distant horses. It was all so familiar. And by the next morning her beloved Zhang Sheng was dead, his smiling face still for eternity. A deep sadness came over her. Time passed, minutes gave way to hours. The morning sun began to burn off the clouds, and there was still no Guo Jing. They waited a few more hours, but all was quiet.
Sixth Brother, Zhu Kong said, turning to Gildan Quan, why don't we take a look? Can we even get up there? Rider Han replied. We can only try.
He ran back to their ger and returned some time later with 2 ropes, axes, and a bundle of nails. Together, Gildan Quan and Zhu Kong began to climb, hammering nails, using their lightness kung fu and pulling each other up. It was a long and sweaty process. But what they saw once they reached the top surprised them both. In fact, it drained the blood from their cheeks. There, beside the rock where Guo Jing was used to practicing his Negong, lay a neat pile of 9 skulls, 5, 3, and then 1 balancing on top. Closer inspection revealed 5 perfect, clean-cut holes in each, as if carved with a knife.
Their hearts were thumping as they moved around, scanning their surroundings. Apart from the deep scar that scored the rock, they saw nothing unusual, and so lowered themselves back down the cliff face. Rider Han was waiting, shaking with anxiety. "It's her, Cyclone May," Zhu Kong declared. The others froze. So I used the wrong voice for the character. It's fine. "What about Guo Jing?" Jade Han asked. "They descended on the other side, as far as we can tell," Gildan Quan replied. He went on to describe what they had seen. 18 years of hardship, and 12 of them were spent raising a fox," Kejene said. "The boy is loyal and honest. He wouldn't behave in such an ungrateful manner," Jade Han cried. "Loyal and honest? If so, how could he spend 2 years training with that witch without saying anything?" Kejene's voice was as hard as ice. Jade Han did not know what to say. Her thoughts were so tangled. "Is that blind hag using Guo Jing to hurt us?" Rider Han said. "It looks that way," Zhu Kong said. "But Guo Jing isn't capable of acting like that. We've known him since he was a child," Jade Han said. "So she has kept him in the dark as to her true intentions," Gildan Quan said. "His lightness technique is improved, and his Neigong inner strength is considerable, to be sure," Rider Han said. "But his martial skills are still lacking. Why hasn't she worked on that?" "She's using him. She doesn't want him to be truly competent," Kejene said. "Guo Jing killed her husband, after all." "Indeed," Zhu Kong said. "She wants him to kill us all, one by one. Then she will finish Guo Jing herself, her revenge complete." Their brother's logic sent shivers through them. Kejene jabbed his staff into the ground. "We will go back and pretend we know nothing of this," he says. "When Guo Jing arrives, we will kill him. Then, when the witch comes to find him, we will fight her. Her martial arts may have improved, but she is still blind. It is not beyond us." "Kill him? What about our bet with Qiu Chuji?" Jade Han said. "Which is more important, our lives or a bet?" No one replied. "We can't!" Woodcutter Nan broke the silence. "We can't do what, exactly?" Rider Han said. "We can't kill him," Nan said, shaking his head. "I agree with fourth brother," Jade Han said. "We must first investigate the truth before jumping to conclusions." "This is serious," Gildan Quan said. "If we hesitate, if we let him know we know, who can say what will happen to us?" "There will be terrible consequences unless we act now. This is Cyclone May we are dealing with." "Third brother, what do you think we should do?" Kejene turned to Rider Han. Rider Han was undecided, but the sight of his sister's tears moved him. "I have to agree with fourth brother. I cannot kill Guo Jing." They had reached a deadlock. 3 favored killing their disciple, 3 preferred a more cautious approach. "If fifth brother were here, he would agree with us. He would agree with us," Zhu Kong said sadly. This sent a stabbing pain through Jade Han's heart, and the tears poured down her cheeks in earnest. We must avenge fifth brother. Let us do as big brother says." "Then let's go back." The freaks returned to their gare in silence, each nearly drowning in the swell of their own thoughts. Two. When Guo Jing climbed to the top of the cliff, he found the Taoist waiting for him as usual. "Look," the Taoist said, pointing at the rock. Guo Jing approached and saw 9 skulls gleaming in the moonlight. "Twice foul dark wind are back?" he said, a quiver in his voice. You know about Twice Foul Dark Wind? Guo Jing told the story of their fight on that bleak mountain top, the battle in which he lost his fifth Shifu and killed Hurricane Chen. The memory made his body shake and he could barely talk. He was just a child back then, and he only learned who the two ghastly figures were many years later from his Shifus. Copper Corpse stopped at no evil, but he died by your hand. My Shifus frequently talk of Twice Foul Dark Wind. My third and seventh Shifus tell me Cyclone May must be dead, but Master K always says, Not necessarily. But look, Iron Corpse is still alive. The Taoist saw another shiver go through the boy. Did you see her? Guo Jing asked. I arrived not long ago, but I spotted the skulls at once. She must have returned for you and your Shifus. Master K blinded her. We aren't supposed to be so scared of her. The Taoist took a skull and examined it. Her kung fu is impressive indeed, he said, shaking his head. I fear your Shifus are no match for her, not even if I were to help. The man's words frightened Guo Jing. 12 years ago, when she still had her sight, she was unable to overcome my masters. There were only 7 of them then. Now we are 8. You will help us, won't you? The Taoist paused before answering. I cannot understand how her fingers have come to be so strong and terrible. As they say, the good cometh not, and those who cometh are not good. She must be confident that she can defeat you. Why did she arrange the skulls here? A warning? This way we have time to take precautions. I imagine it is part of the practice of the 9-yin skeleton claw. She probably assumed no one ever comes up here, as it's so difficult to reach. We are lucky to have come across them. I must warn my Shifus at once. Good idea. Tell them a good friend has asked you to pass on this message. They must not fight her. It's not worth it. Instead, you must all hide and think of a solution. Guo Jing nodded and made his way to the edge of the cliff. But seconds later, the Taoist grabbed him around the waist and jumped, landing lightly behind the rock, where they hid. Guo Jing was about to ask what was happening when a hand cupped his mouth and he was pulled to the ground. But he could not resist looking, so he raised his head back up above the rock. A dark silhouette was rising up from behind the other side of the cliff, her long hair fluttering in the moonlight. She had in fact ascended by the more difficult side, but as she was blind, she most likely could not tell. The 6 freaks of the south had been lucky. Cyclone May began spinning quickly, and Guo Jing ducked back down. Then he remembered she was blind. By now she was sitting cross-legged on the rock he used for training, breathing slowly and deeply. Some time passed, and then a cracking sound started echoing around them. First slow, then faster, like beans popping in hot oil. The noise was coming from her joints, but she was sitting perfectly still. Guo Jing had no idea what kind of Neigong this was, but he became acutely aware of his own limitations in comparison. The cracking went on for some time before gradually slowing again and coming to a halt. She then rose to her feet and pulled something from her waist. A silver snake? Guo Jing watched in amazement as he realized it was a very long whip. His third Shifu, Rider Han's golden dragon whip, barely reached 6 feet, whereas May's must have been more than 30 feet long. 30 feet long. She turned slowly. The light from the moon caught her extraordinary features, but she was a gruesome sight. She had her eyes closed, and her hair drooped across her face.
Dear husband,
Her breathy whisper carried through the silence.
do you miss me down there in the underworld?
She held the whip in both hands. A deep laugh rose from within her, and the whip began to dance. It was a strange sight. She moved the whip slowly, and he could hear no sound. A roll to one side, a flip to the other. Then she struck at a rock, shattering it. The rocks around her soon bore the scars. What was not clear in the dim light of the moon was that it was made from fishing net rope plated with copper and silver. Just then she struck at a stone and lifted it as if she had taken it in her palm. Guo Jing watched in astonishment. The whip then sailed through the air toward him, the dozen hooks fastened to it glinting in the moonlight. Guo Jing clutched at his dagger. As the hooks came closer, he instinctively raised his blade to meet them. But just as quickly, he felt a tingle in his arm, and he was on the ground just as a flash of silver passed above him. It nearly went through my skull, Guo Jing thought to himself, cold with sweat. But the Taoist's movements had been quick, and Mei was unaware that they were hiding so close. She continued to practice a little longer before replacing the whip in her belt, performing some stretches, and then making her way back down the cliff. Guo Jing clambered to his feet.
We'll follow her and see what she's up to,
The Taoist hissed. He caught Guo Jing by the belt, and together they too slid down. Once at the bottom, they caught sight of Iron Corpse already some distance to the north. The Taoist hooked his arm around Guo Jing, who felt himself instantly a lot lighter, and then they raced off at a great speed across the steppe. They stalked her across the desert until day's first lights started to appear in the east. The faint outlines of a camp made up of a dozen large gers appeared on the horizon. Mei disappeared into one of them. They accelerated, avoiding the lookouts on patrol, and stopped close to a large beige ger that blended into the desert sands. They crept in the dirt, lifted a small corner of the tent, and peered inside. Inside, they saw a man draw a blade. Just then he sliced it down on another man, who collapsed, and, as he fell, he turned so that he was facing Guo Jing and the Taoist. "It's him! How come?" Guo Jing whispered, lifting the edge a little further. It was one of Temujin's personal guards. The man with the saber turned, and Guo Jing looked up at his face. Sengum, son of Ong Khan. Sengum wiped the blood from his blade on the sole of his shoe and spoke.
No more doubts now, huh?
My brother Temujin is brave and resourceful, answered another man, hidden from view.
I fear your plan will not be easy to execute.
Jamuka, Temujin's sworn brother. Guo Jing recognized his voice.
If you love him, why not warn him?
Sengum sneered. You too are my sworn brother, Jamuka replied.
Your father has always treated me with kindness. I won't betray you. What is more, Temujin hopes to swallow my army into his. I know this. Our oath of brotherhood is the only thing keeping me from breaking our alliance.
Are they plotting against Temujin? Guo Jing asked himself. How is this possible? Who moves first wins, another man added. If you let him attack, you'll both be in trouble. If you triumph, all Temujin's livestock, women, and stores of treasure will go to Sengum. His men will be incorporated into Jamuka's army, and I will give Jamuka the title of Queller of the North. This man had his back to Guo Jing, so he shuffled a little to one side in order to get a better look. He was swathed in expensively embroidered yellow brocade. The sixth prince of the Jin Empire. Jamuka seemed moved.
I will obey as long as my adoptive father, Ong Khan, gives me the order. If my father doesn't give the order, he will have offended the Jin Empire, Sengum replied in obvious delight. I will ask him. He would never refuse the sixth prince.
Soon our soldiers will move south against the Song, Wanyan Honglie said. If each of you bring 20,000 men and help with the invasion, there will be yet further rewards.
People say the South is beautiful, the streets are paved with gold, and the women are delicate like flowers, Sengum said. We would be delighted to go with the prince and see for ourselves.
That can certainly be arranged, Wanyan Honglie said with a smile. I only worry there will be too many beautiful women to choose between. The Ger erupted with laughter. Tell me, how do you plan to deal with Temujin? Wanyan Honglie paused and then continued. I initially asked him to help us invade the Song, but he refused me. He is clever. We mustn't raise his suspicions. You must be especially careful. Just then the Taoist tugged at Guo Jing's sleeve. He turned and saw Cyclone May in the distance. Her claws grasped around the figure of a man, as if interrogating him. Whatever she's doing here, for now my Shifus are not in harm's way, Guo Jing thought to himself. First I must listen and find out what they are planning against the Khan. So this is actually a scene that is going to pay off a lot later. Yeah, I don't think they explain why she's here right now. That gets explained that I don't think even gets explained in this volume. I think it's explained in the next volume. So there's some forward planning. Some forward planning going on here. So I won't spoil why she's here. Cyclone May. But anyway, it gets them there just in time for mutiny, betrayal, and such. Good times. First I must listen and find out what they are planning against the Khan. He crept back into position.
My son is betrothed to his daughter, Sengum was saying, and he sent this man to settle on a date for the union.
He pointed at the dead man.
I'll send one of my men at once and invite him to speak with my father tomorrow. He will come alone. I will position my men along the road. That way, no matter if he has heads and legs for 3 men, he won't get away.
What? Heads and legs for... Okay, sure. It is settled. Once we are rid of Temujin, we will raid his camp and kill them all. Unless that was supposed to be Jamuka, I'm not sure. Guo Jing was shaking with fury. How could anyone be so heartless as to plot against his own sworn brother? He leaned in to listen further, but felt the Taoist pull at his belt. He turned and felt a rush of air at his ear as Iron Corpse swept past and onto the distance, a man dangling in her grasp. The Taoist took Guo Jing by the hand, and together they left the camp. Well, other than her stealing people, there's an additional connection that's going to be made clear later. But it's not going to be until the next volume, so you won't know for months. Basically. You guys won't know. I do, but you won't.
She wanted to know where your Shifus are,
the Taoist hissed.
We've got to move quickly.
They sped across the desert sand, using the best of their lightness technique. By the time they arrived at the camp, the sun was already reaching its highest point in the sky. The Taoist spoke.
I wanted to remain discreet. That is why I told you not to tell your Shifus about me. But this is an emergency. Such details are not important anymore. Go in and tell them that Ma Treasure Yu of the Quanzhen sect seeks an audience with the 6 heroes of the South.
This was the first time in 2 years of nightly meetings that Guo Jing had heard his name. He did not know who the man standing before him was, that his was a name revered all across the Wulin, so he merely nodded. He ran to the Ger, pulled back the cloth covering the doorway, and called, "Master!" Suddenly something grabbed hold of both his wrists. He felt a sharp pain at the back of his knees, and he fell to the floor. "Huh?" He looked up and saw above him an iron club making its way toward his head. Oh, wait, no, that might be someone, There we go. It's someone else screaming. Not him. He looked up and saw above him an iron club making its way toward his head. He turned and saw his first Shifu, Keijene. Terror chased all sense from his body, and he was left unable to defend himself. He scrunched into a ball, closed his eyes, and waited for the deadly blow. Just then, weapons clashed above his head, and a body landed on top of him. "Brother, no!" He opened his eyes and realized it was his seventh Shifu, Jade Han. She was protecting him, but her sword had been knocked away by Kei Zhen-Ei's staff.
Sister, you have always been too soft-hearted.
Kei sighed, his staff clattering as it dropped to the ground. Only then did Guo Jing see that it was Zhu Kong and Gildan Quan clutching his hands. His mind was a muddle.
And your Negong master?
Kei Zhen-Ei sneered.
Outside, Guo Jing stammered. We've come to talk with you, my Shifus. Cyclone May has come back, and she's looking for you. We followed her to Sengum's Ger.
The freaks were astonished to hear that Cyclone May had come to confront them during the hours of daylight. They took their weapons and rushed outside. There, bowing before them, a Taoist with a long, wispy beard. Still clutching Guo Jing's wrist, Zhu Kong turned to the boy.
What about the witch? He spat.
We just saw her, Guo Jing said.
The six freaks looked at Ma Yu with suspicion. He took a step forward.
I have long heard of the valiant deeds of the 6 heroes of the South, and today I finally have the honor of making your acquaintance.
Zhu Kong nodded, his grip still tight on the boy.
Might I dare ask the Taoist's name?
Realizing he had not introduced himself properly, he had not introduced him properly, Guo Jing cut in.
His name is Ma Yu of the Quanzhen sect.
The six freaks were taken aback. They knew of Ma Yu, of course, and also known by his monastic name, Scarlet Sun, the first disciple of Wang Chongyang, who had assumed leadership of the Quanzhen sect upon their master's death. Elder Eternal Spring Qiu Chuji was his younger martial brother. Ma Yu rarely made an appearance in the martial world, preferring to dedicate himself to meditation, so his brother Qiu was perhaps more famous. No one had ever seen Ma Yu fight, so the level of his kung fu skills was unknown.
Elder Scarlet Sun of the Quanzhen sect, please forgive us our impertinence. We did not know to whom he owed the honor, Kei Zhen-Ei said. What brings the master so far north? Is it related to the contest your martial brother challenged us to in Jiaxing? My younger martial should be devoting himself to the Tao, but instead he likes to make bets and enter into duels, Ma Yu replied. This is a violation of the principle of Wu Wei, action through non-action, and it is not behavior that behooves a monk. I have told him as much many times, but he will not listen. I have no intention of interfering in your contest. I make no inquiries in this regard, as it has nothing to do with me. At most, I can acknowledge that you have entered into this arrangement in good faith, in the name of aiding patriots. No, I come not because of that. 2 years ago I came across this young boy, and seeing that he was pure of heart, I decided to teach him some techniques to strengthen his body and cultivate his mind, techniques by which followers of the Tao prolong life. This I did without asking permission from his Shifus, the 6 heroes, and for that I wish to express regret and request forgiveness. I have taught him no kung fu, and have never claimed him as my disciple. He is my young friend, that is all. I wish to make it clear that I have not broken any code of the Wulin.
The freaks were surprised, but had no reason to doubt his explanation. Zhu Kong and Gildan Quan let go of the boy's wrists.
Boy, you were being taught by his reverence Ma Yu?
Jade Han said, smiling and patting Guo Jing on the shoulder. Why didn't you tell us? We accused you without cause. He told me not to say, Guo Jing stammered. Boy, do not speak of his reverence so casually. That is most disrespectful, Jade Han said. Yet her expression told him she was not angry. Yes, his reverence, Scarlet's son, Guo Jing said. For 2 years they had treated... I don't know how he knows he's called Scarlet's son, but it's okay. I guess somebody told him. For 2 years they had treated each other as Jake breakers. I swear I am not passing gas. That is a truck Jake breaking. Or engine braking, as the case may be. To use a less idiomatic term. For yes, his reverence Scarlet's son, Guo Jing said. For 2 years they had treated each other as equals, never using titles or formalities in word or conduct. Guo Jing had thought of him as his uncle, and Ma Yu had never been offended. I am a cloud with no fixed plan or destination, Ma Yu said. I do not like to inform people of my wanderings. Please forgive my rudeness at having never visited, despite knowing the 6 heroes were close by. He bowed. Ma Yu had held the freaks in great esteem after learning the story of their journey north. But he also heard from Harmony Yin that Guo Jing was lacking in the foundations of Neigong inner strength. Harmony Yin is the guy who came and tested Guo Jing. I couldn't remember his name. He understood better than anyone else that adherence to the Tao demands selfless service to others, and he was displeased in the extreme that his martial brother Qiu Chuji should leave such an important task as teaching a great patriot's son to the freaks of the South. Selling them a little short, but all right. But no matter how he tried to convince him of the inappropriateness of his methods, Qiu Chuji would not relent. So, without telling anyone, Ma Yu made the journey north to teach Guo Jing and help the freaks prevail. Could he really have come across the boy just by chance out here on the vast expanse of the northern steppe? Why else would he dedicate 2 years to the task? Had it not been for Mei's sudden appearance, he would have continued until satisfied that the boy possessed an adequate foundation in Neigong, and then disappeared back south without anyone ever finding out, neither the freaks of the south nor Qiu Chuji. The freaks bowed, impressed by Ma Yu's modest attitude. They saw in him a learned and virtuous man. The contrast with his rash and arrogant martial brother was plain to see. Just as they were about to inquire about Cyclone May, they were interrupted by the sound of hooves, followed by a group of horses clattering past on their way toward Temujin's camp. Guo Jing knew them to be the messengers Sengum had sent to entrap the Khan, and panic rose in him. Eldest master, he said, turning to Kei, I must go. I will be back soon. Kei was still feeling guilty at having almost killed him minutes previously, and his regard and love for the boy had only grown stronger. He did not want Guo Jing to encounter Mei out on the steppe by himself. No, you must stay with us. You cannot leave. Guo Jing wanted to explain his reasons, but Kei had already turned to Ma Yu and begun discussing their encounter all those years ago with Twice Foul Dark Wind, high up on the desolate mountain top. He was agitated, an unusual sight indeed. Master Kei was usually so composed. Yet Guo Jing decided not to interrupt. He would wait for a pause in the conversation to report what was happening over at Temujin's Ger. Just then a horse came galloping toward them. The rider was dressed in a short black fox fur coat. Kojin. She stopped 10 paces away and waved at Guo Jing. Guo Jing was afraid of incurring his master's wrath, so instead he motioned for her to come closer. Kojin's eyes were red and swollen as if she had been crying. She approached, sniffling. Pa wants me to marry that man, to Sokka. Saying it out loud brought forth another round of tears. You have to go back and tell the Khan that it's a trap. Sengum and Jamuka are going to kill him. Are you sure? Kojin replied in shock. Absolutely sure. I heard them talking about it with the sixth prince. Go, quickly. I will. Excited, she turned and sped back to the camp. How can she be happy that they want to kill her father? Guo Jing said to himself. She hopes she won't have to marry Tusaka, he realized. He wanted to protect her, so the possibility that she might escape such a fate was to be welcomed. A smile spread across his face. Ma Yu's words brought his attention back to more urgent matters. It's not that I wish to demean our collective capabilities, he was saying, but Cyclone May is the true successor of to the Lord of Peach Blossom Island. She has studied the techniques of the 9-yin skeleton claw to perfection, and her use of the whip is subtle and creative. I fear it may even be the white python, which has not been popular in the Wulin for more than 100 years. Of course, I am not saying that with 8 of us defeat is inevitable, but I fear we will have to suffer grievous losses if we are to be rid of her. Her kung fu is deadly indeed, Jade Han said, but the 7 freaks of the south bear her a hate as deep as any ocean. I have heard it spoken in the Wulin that your 5th brother Zhang and Flying Divine Dragon Kei Bixier were both killed by Copper Corpse. But as the freaks in turn defeated him, it could be said that you have had your revenge. As the ancients said, it is easier to untie an enemy than to put him in knots. May is a widow now, blind and alone. Indeed, more than anything, she deserves our pity. The freaks made no reply. After a pause of some time, Rider Han spoke.
We don't know how many die every year thanks to her sinister arts. Your reverence, your compassion is admirable, but you cannot absolve evil or allow it to go unchallenged.
She
has come to us this time. We did not seek her out, Zhu Kong said. Even if we choose not to fight, we will never be safe so long as she wants revenge, Gildan Quan added. I do have a plan, but it requires forgiving hearts, Ma Yu said. A show of mercy, a chance for her to redeem her sins. Zhu Kong decided to let his eldest brother, Kei Zhene, speak for them. We, the 7 freaks of the south, are coarse by nature, and know only the power of physical force, Kei Zhene said. We would be eternally grateful if his reverence could show us a more enlightened path. Please, explain. Kei Zhene had understood from the Taoist's words that Mei's kung fu had advanced over the last 12 years, and he was trying to save them from humiliation as much as from her poisoned grip. The other freaks, having yet to understand this, were astonished by what they thought was a change of heart from their master, an inclination toward benevolence above all else. Your charity will be rewarded by the heavens, valiant brother Kei. Firstly, I would like to point out that Twice Foul Dark Wind were disciples of the Lord of Peach Blossom Island, Apothecary Huang, the alchemist. If he finds out we have killed Iron Corpse, he will be most displeased, and our problems will be manifold. Apothecary Huang's kung fu was often spoken of in such absurdly exaggerated tones that Kei Zhene and Zhu Kong found it hard to believe he could be as formidable as people said. Yet Ma Yu was the most senior living Taoist of the Wulin's greatest orthodox sect. If he feared him, then there must be truth to the rumors. More on Apothecary Huang later, by the way. I don't think we really get introduced to him this volume. Next volume is like Apothecary Huang o'clock. He is an important character, suffice it to say. Keep the name in your mind. Also known as the Heretic. So remember that particular name. Or leave it somewhere on the back burner. Master Ma is... Oh, who is saying that? Master Ma is most cautious, and my brothers hold your reverence in the highest esteem. Please direct us to the correct path,
Zhu Kong said. My path may seem ambitious, and arrogant even. All I ask is that the six heroes of the South do not laugh at it.
The master is too modest. The 7 Quanzhen disciples of Wang Chongyang are admired throughout our lands.
Zhu Kong's respect was indeed genuine, though he felt that Qiu Chuji had done little to deserve it. Our reputations rely entirely on the virtues of our late teacher, Ma Yu replied. But it seems unlikely that Iron Corpse would attack the Quanzhen alone. Therefore, I would like to use our much exaggerated reputation to scare her away. It is a dishonorable plan, to be sure, but the intention is noble, and it will do no damage to the good name of the heroes.
Sirens.
He began to explain the plan, but the freaks could not hide the fact that they were insulted by Ma Yu's suggestion. What if Cyclone May had made progress in her dark arts? Or if Apothecary Huang came to her aid? They might perish like their brother Zhang, but that would do them no discredit. Yet Ma Yu was steadfast in his efforts to persuade them. An unequal contest brings no honor to the victor, he argued. Zhené listened with displeasure, but even he had to recognize the Taoist's prestige and the care he had taken of their student Guo Jing. It was clear that he was trying to help them. Together they ate and talked, and then made their way to the cliff. Ma Yu and Guo Jing were the first to ascend. The others watched Ma Yu's steady, secure steps as he followed behind the boy. His Neigong inner strength kung fu was evident. He's certainly as accomplished as Qiu Chuji, they were thinking, only Elder Eternal Spring has found more fame throughout the South. More a question of personality than ability, they concluded. Once at the top, Ma Yu and Guo Jing released the end of a long rope and pulled the 6 freaks up behind them. There, the freaks laid eyes on the rock covered in the half-inch gashes May had scored across it. It looked more like the work of an axe than a whip. Ma Yu was not exaggerating after all. They sat down on the ground and crossed their legs. Dusk began to obscure the landscape around them, and there they waited until close to midnight, by which time Rider Han could take it no longer.
Why isn't she coming?
Shh, I think I hear her, Zhené hissed. They strained to listen against the silence, but only Zhené could make out the sound of her footsteps several li in the distance. They looked out into the darkness, and there, caught in the moonlight, they saw what looked like a wisp of black smoke racing across the sand toward them. Within moments she was climbing. Zhu Kong glanced at Gildan Quan and Jade Han. Their faces were ashen, and his must have looked the same. At that moment she appeared. They could make out the shape of a figure strapped to her back. It wasn't moving. Was it dead? Guo Jing thought he might recognize Kojin's black fox fur coat. He peered harder. If it wasn't Kojin, then who was it? His mouth was dry, and he could not speak. Zhu Kong quickly placed his hand over Guo Jing's mouth, and then called out, "Cyclone May is an evil demon witch! Once I, Qiu Chuji, get my hands on her, she will be finished!" May froze in surprise, and then ducked behind a rock, waiting for more. Ma Yu and the freaks could not help finding the scene amusing, despite the gravity of what was unfolding. Guo Jing, however, was burning with fear for Kojin's safety.
Cyclone May stacked these skulls so she's been here before.
It was Rider Han who spoke.
All we have to do is wait.
May remembered where she was, uncertain as to how many kung fu masters Qiu Chuji had brought with him. "She has done us much evil," Jade Han replied. "But the Quanzhen sect emphasizes compassion above all else. She must be given another chance."
The Sage of Tranquility is tender of heart, Zhu Kong chuckled. No wonder our master always said you came to the way so effortlessly.
Central divinity Wang Chongyang, founder of the Quanzhen sect, was master to 7 of the greatest fighters of the Wulin. Ma Yu, known by his Taoist name, Scarlet Sun, was considered his first and best disciple. Then came Eternal Truth Tan Chuduan, Eternal Life Liu Chu... Oh, geez Louise, how many names? Okay, give me a minute. As I have said before, I am going to mangle names. I'm going to mangle names of places. Chinese is not my first language. I don't know what this was originally written in. If he hailed from Hong Kong, I don't remember now. I need to bone up on my regional dialect knowledge of China. More Jake breaking. Cool. Embarrassing. Central divinity Wang Chongyang, founder of the Quanzhen sect, was master to 7 of the greatest fighters of the Wulin. Ma Yu, known by his Taoist name, Scarlet Sun, was considered his first and best disciple. Then came Eternal Truth Tan Chuduan, Eternal Life Liu Chuzuan, Eternal Spring Qiu Chuji, Jade Sun Wang Chuyi, Infinite Peace Hao Datong, and finally the Sage of Tranquility, Sun Bu'er, who had been married to Ma Yu before he turned to a life of celibacy and meditation. Oh, okay. Ma Yu turned to a life of celibacy and meditation. Brother Tan, what do you say? Jade Han said, turning to Nan the Merciful.
She is deserving of the harshest punishment.
Brother Tan, you have made great progress of late in your finger brush technique, Zhu Kong continued. Will you give us a demonstration when the witch arrives?
I'd rather think Brother Wang's iron foot would be more appropriate,
Nan said.
He could kick her off the cliff and reduce her to a pile of bones.
Jade's son, Wang Chuyi, was one of the most renowned of the 7 disciples, close behind Qiu Chuji. He once stood for hours on the edge of a high ravine on 1 foot, as a bet, the wind beating against him and his fluttering sleeves. A crowd of martial artists who had traveled from the north watched in astonishment, giving him the name Immortal of the Iron Foot. He spent 9 years living as a recluse in a mountain cave, practicing his arts. Qiu Chuji wrote a poem in honor of his skill, including the now famous couplet, 9 summers he stood, greeting the sun. 3 winters he embraced the snow as he slept. The exchange had been discussed in advance. Only Kei Zhene had ever spoken to Mei, so they were sure she would not recognize the others' voices. Iron Corpse grew more alarmed as she listened. All 7 masters of the Quanzhen here, on the steppe? 1 noxious Taoist would be no problem, but 7? The moon was still high in the sky, bathing the summit in its cold light, but it was not going to last for long. A bank of black clouds is coming in, Zhu Kong said quietly. Soon we won't be able to see our own hands. We must be careful not to let the witch escape. Mei knew that Night's cloak would work to her advantage. Guo Jing's gaze was still fixed on Kojin. Just then he saw her slowly open her eyes. She was still alive. He tried to wave at her not to move. Kojin caught sight of her friend. "Help! Save me!" "Shh!" Guo Jing hissed back. Mei froze. She then quickly pressed a finger against one of Kojin's pressure points, and the girl went limp. Now she was suspicious. "Harmony Yin, did you say something?" Zhu Kong said.
Yes,
Guo Jing stuttered. "I think I heard the voice of a young girl," Zhu Kong continued.
Yes, I think you're right,
Guo Jing replied. What are the chances of me meeting all 7 masters of the Quanzhen sect here, on this particular summit, so far out in the wilds of the north? Mei began to ask herself. It could be a trick. I cannot see them, after all. Ma Yu watched as she slowly rose to her feet from behind the rock, and understood that her suspicions were aroused. If she realized it was all a lie and attacked, he would no doubt escape unscathed, but Kojin would certainly be sacrificed, as would some of the freaks. Quick thinking was not his strong point, and, at this moment, he had not the slightest idea what to do. Zhu Kong caught sight of Mei's long silver whip. She raised it slowly above her head. Brother, you have been practicing the 24 secrets of the Golden Gate and Jade Lock, as passed down by our great master, for years now. You must be quite the expert. Will you show us? Perhaps we could learn a few tricks. While I may be the eldest among us, Ma Yu replied, understanding Zhu Kong's plan, I have been slow to absorb our master's deepest teachings. I can replicate only a fraction of the full repertoire. What do I have to show you, my brothers? His breathing was deliberate, as he used it to carry his words loud and clear to where Mei was standing. Though modest in content, each word shook the valley walls and echoed against the rocks, carried on the cliff winds like a dragon's roar and an eagle's cry.
He is projecting from his diaphragm.
Mei recognized his powerful Negong inner strength and lowered herself back behind the rock. I heard that she is blind in both eyes and deserves our pity, Ma Yu continued. If she would promise to never again attack the innocent or cause trouble for the 6 freaks of the south, then we could let her go. Our master was, after all, a good friend of the Lord of Peach Blossom Island. They held each other in great esteem. Brother Chu, you are acquainted with the freaks. Why don't you try to negotiate? Tell them to abandon their hopes of revenge. If everyone decides to forgive what is in the past, the feud will be over. This time he spoke without the aid of his internal strength, so as not to expose the freaks as having lesser kung fu. Of course, but the real issue is whether Cyclone Mei will agree to a reconciliation, Zhu Kong replied. Just then, a voice sharp and cold like ice came from behind the rock. May I thank the 7 masters of the Quanzhen sect for their kindness. I am Cyclone Mei. There she was. Ma Yu had planned to frighten her away so that she could reflect on the matter by herself, but Iron Corpse was braver than he had given her credit for. As a lowly woman, I dare not seek advice from the masters, she continued, but I have long heard that the Sage of Tranquility is of consummate skill. May I ask that she shows me some of her moves? She lifted her whip and waited for Jade Han's reply. Guo Jing, meanwhile, was still concerned about Kojin, who was now lying motionless on the ground. Unable to stand it any longer, he rushed over to her and swooped her up into his arms. But Mei heard him and hooked her claws around his wrist. Using the inner strength he had been cultivating under Ma Yu's instructions, Guo Jing flicked Kojin toward Jade Han and, with a twist of his left hand, wrestled free. Mei responded quickly, seizing him again and pressing on his artery, paralyzing him. Who are you? She hissed. Harmony, be careful! Zhu Kong called out. Zhu Kong's words had come just in time, as in his panic Guo Jing was about to give away his real identity. I am Harmony Yin, he stuttered, disciple of Eternal Spring. He had practiced the phrase at least 40 times, but he could not get the words out smoothly. A young follower, but his Negong is of note, Mei said to herself. He managed to save the girl and free himself from my grip. I'd better keep my distance. She snorted and let him go. Guo Jing ran back to the others and examined the 5 indentations she had left in his flesh. She had not used all her strength. That much he understood. She could have snapped his hand off if she so desired. Mei was now no longer so keen to fight with the Sage of Tranquility. A thought came to her.
Elder Ma, could you explain to me what is meant by conserve the lead and mercury of immortality?
Lead is solid like the kidneys, Ma Yu began, and mercury flows like water, like the body's internal heat. The principle of storing mercury and lead in the body in order to achieve immortality essentially means consolidating the kidneys and extinguishing the fires of the heart-mind, that is to say, pent-up anger or worry. This can be achieved through breathing exercises.
And what about three splendors gather at the crown, five forces to the origin? My master, Lord of Peach Blossom Island, gave the most beautiful explanations. I am wondering what the Quan Zhen sect says.
Ma Yu realized that she was asking him to explain the secrets of Neigong inner strength kung fu. Ask your own master. Go, get out of here.
May cackled. Thank you, Elder Ma, for your wise reply.
She lurched upwards, whipped the rock one last time, and sailed off down the mountainside. It was a marvelous, terrifying sight. They watched in relief as the cloud of black smoke sped across the desert sands. The witch was far away now, but they could not shake their fear quite so fast. Ma Yu pressed on Kojin's pressure points, and she came to life. They then laid her out on the rock so that she could recover.
I never imagined she would be able to make such progress in just 10 years, Zhu Kong said. We freaks would have encountered a terrible fate indeed, if had it not been for Elder Ma's generous help.
Ma Yu made a humble reply, but his brow was furrowed, and he could not hide his worry.
While we may not have the greatest skills, Zhu Kong continued, if there is anything Elder Ma would like us to do, please do not hesitate to ask.
That witch caught me in a moment of inattention, Ma Yu replied.
Did she injure you? Did she use some secret weapon?
No, no, nothing like that. It is that I fear the answer I gave to her questions will bring great trouble. The freaks were confused. Iron Corpse has achieved great heights in her external kung fu techniques. Even if my martial brothers Qiu Chuji and Jade Sun Wang Chuyi had been here to help, I doubt we could have defeated her. This only proves the exceptional talents of her master, Lord of Peach Blossom Island. But it is her Neigong inner kung fu that is lacking. I don't know where she managed to find the secret formulas of Taoist Neigong practice, but she will be unable to comprehend them without the instructions of a Shifu. Her lack of understanding has kept her progress to date in check, but I fear that my explanation will allow her to make considerable advancements.
Or perhaps she will realize her mistake and stop this evil, Jade Han said.
Let us hope so, or else it will prove even more difficult to stop her. It is all my fault for letting down my guard.
He paused for a moment and continued.
But the skills taught on Peach Blossom Island are very different to those of the Quan Zhen. How did she know to ask those questions?
The others stopped and noticed as Kojin began to stir. She sat up and spoke.
Guo Jing, Papa didn't believe me. He's gone to visit Ong Khan.
How could he not believe you? Guo Jing cried.
I told him that Uncle Sengum and Uncle Jamuka were plotting against him, but he laughed and said I was just trying to get out of marrying Tusaka, and that I was lying. I said that you were the one who hurt them, and that made him even more suspicious. He said he would punish you on his return. He took 3 of my brothers and some of his men. I came to find you, but that blind woman captured me. Did she bring me to you?
You are lucky we were here, the freaks thought to themselves. Otherwise you would have 5 holes in your head by now.
When did the great Khan leave?
Guo Jing demanded.
Hours ago. Papa wanted to get there as soon as possible. He didn't want to wait for morning, so they took their fastest horses. They must be very far away by now. Does Uncle Sengum really want to hurt Papa? What are we going to do?
She started crying. Guo Jing did not know what to say. It was the first time he had ever had to deal with a crisis of this magnitude. Guo, go back down the cliff. Get your horse and ride out after the Khan, Zhu Kong said, taking charge. We will send someone to determine what is going on. Kojin, you go and ask your remaining brothers to gather their men and go after your father. Guo Jing was already making his way down the cliff face. Ma Yu lowered Kojin on a rope. Guo Jing hurried back to his mother's ger, mounted his little auburn horse, Ulan, and set off northward. The morning's first sun rays were drowning out the moon. His heart was racing as fast as his steed's hooves against the dirt. What if the great Khan has already fallen prey to Sengum's trap? He thought to himself. What if I'm too late? Guo Jing was able to ride like this for hours. Oh, whoops. Hello. I skipped a paragraph. My bad. Guo Jing's horse loved to gallop, to feel its hooves pounding through the dust. Guo Jing tried to stop for a rest, fearing that it might stumble from fatigue, but as soon as he loosened the reins, it neighed and picked up speed again. The colt kept a steady breath and ran with no apparent effort. Guo Jing was able to ride like this for hours due to his inner strength kung fu training. 3 hours had passed when he spotted 3 ranks lined up further ahead. There must have been at least 3,000 men. He rode closer. Ong Khan's banner. The men stood with arrows drawn, swords ready. They are blocking the road, Guo Jing said to himself. The Khan must be up ahead. He squeezed his thighs and the horse shot on. He heard shouts and the drumming of hooves, but Guo Jing was already past them and gone. Up ahead he could see another 3 companies of men lying in ambush. Farther on in the distance, the white hairs of Temujin's banner were edging on northward, accompanied by several hundred men on horses. Guo Jing pushed onward and drew up beside the Khan himself.
Great Khan, you must turn around!
Temujin stopped in surprise. Why? Guo Jing repeated to the Khan all that he had overheard in Sengum's ger the previous evening, adding that the road behind him had been blocked. Temujin surveyed the boy with skepticism, trying to work out if it was a trick. Sengum had always been hostile, it was true, but his adoptive father, Ong Khan, had put great trust in him. And how could his Anda Jamuka plot against him? Unless this was the work of the 6th prince of the Jin Empire, sowing discord among the Mongols?
Great Khan, if you send someone back, you will know I am telling the truth.
Temujin had survived incalculable battles. He was raised on plot and intrigue. The chances that Ong Khan and Jamuka were betraying him were slim, but something nevertheless told him he should be careful. It never hurt anyone to be too cautious. He turned to his second son, Chagatai, and ordered that he and Chilaun should turn back to survey the situation. Find out if the boy is right. They swung their horses around and sped away. Temujin looked out across the land. Take that hill and prepare. He may have only had a few hundred men with him, but they were his best fighters. They galloped up to high ground and started moving stones and digging trenches. Before long, clouds of dust rose in the south, quickly followed by thousands of men on horses, chasing Chagatai and Chilaun. Jebe could just make out the banners behind them. On Khan's men, he shouted. They were divided into several teams and were trying to outflank Temujin's scouts. But Chagatai and Chilaun were lying flat in their saddles, spurring the horses as hard as they could. Guo Jing, we will help them, Jebe cried. The 2 men galloped down the hill. Guo Jing's steed rushed in excitement to join the other horses, and within moments he was close to Chilaun. He felt a rush of air. Guo Jing released 3 arrows, hitting the first 3 of Ong Khan's men. He then drove his horse behind Chagatai and Chilaun and continued firing. Another man fell. Jebe drew up beside Guo Jing, and he too shot and killed several men. But with a continuous swell of soldiers crashing toward them, how could they possibly triumph? Chagatai, Chilaun, Jebe, and Guo Jing drew close to the hill where Temujin and the others were standing guard. Arrows rained down from higher ground, forcing Ong Khan's men to hold back. Temujin kept watch from where he stood. Ong Khan's army was closing in from all sides. It would be near impossible to break their formation, so the best they could do, Temujin realized, was to employ their best delaying tactics. "Invite Sengum to come and speak with me," he roared. Sengum ascended under an umbrella of a dozen shields. He was in high spirits and called out,
Temujin, time to surrender!
"Please tell me first how it is I came to offend my adopted father Ong Khan so that he attacks me."
We Mongolians have lived in our separate tribes for generations, dividing our flocks between us.
Sengum replied.
You tell me, Temujin, why it is you insist on violating the ways of our ancestors by mixing the clans. My father frequently tells us that, in this, you do wrong.
"We Mongolians live in subjugation to the Jin Empire, which demands of us a tribute of tens of thousands of our cattle and horses each year," came Temujin's reply. "Do you think this is proper? We will starve if it continues. Why should we fear the Jin? They are a threat only when we fight each other. I have always had a good relationship with my adoptive father. There is no hatred between our families. This is the work of the Jin. They sow discord between us." Temujin's words moved Sengum's soldiers, who found he spoke with reason. "We Mongolians are warriors, all of us," Temujin continued. "Why shouldn't we take gold and silver from the Jin, rather than giving away our best fleeces? Why should we be the ones to pay tribute? There are idle men among us, to be sure, but there are many who work hard to herd our cattle. Why should they toil and provide for the ones who refuse to do their part? Why not give them more reward? May the lazy be left to starve. They bring it on themselves." Mongolians were organized around a clan principle that held their cattle for all. Herds had been growing, and the tribes had learned from the Chinese to use iron tools and weapons. But in reality, as Temujin knew, most herders wished to keep the fruits of their own labor, just as soldiers are reluctant to share the spoils of war with those who did not go to fight. Sengum was disturbed by the effect Temujin's words were having on his men.
Lay down your weapons and surrender. All I have to do is give one signal with my whip, and 10,000 arrows will come raining down upon you.
The situation was becoming critical, and Guo Jing did not know what to do. Just then his eye was caught by a young officer draped in a silvery gray sable coat at the foot of the hill. His horse was pacing, and in his hand he carried a long broadsword. Tusaka, Sengum's son, the bully from his childhood, the boy who had tried to release leopards on Tolui. Guo Jing could not pretend to understand why Ong Khan, Sengum, and Jamuka were turning on Temujin. They had always lived side by side in peace. The only explanation he could come up with was a plot by Tusaka and his father, under the influence of the sixth prince of the Jin. Vicious lies. Maybe if I capture Tusaka and force him to admit it, then everyone can be reconciled? Guo Jing spurred his horse and sped down the hill. Before anyone could stop him, he drew up to the young man. Tusaka was startled by Guo Jing's approach, and sliced his blade in defense. Guo Jing ducked into his saddle just in time, grabbed at Tusaka's left wrist, and pressed on the artery in one of Zhu Kong's split muscles lock bones moves. Tusaka was rendered powerless, and Guo Jing tugged him from his saddle. Just then Guo Jing heard the whistle of something speeding through the air toward him. He squeezed his thighs, and with a lurch, his small horse leaped back up the hill. "Fire!" Guo Jing hauled Tusaka onto his saddle behind him. Sengum's men could not shoot at him for fear of hurting their commander's son. Once at the summit, Guo Jing threw Tusaka on the ground at Temujin's feet.
Great Khan, it's all the fault of this beggar. He can tell you himself.
Guo Jing's actions delighted Temujin, and he placed the point of his lance on the young man's chest. Looking down at Sengum, he called, "Tell your men to retreat 300 paces." Sengum had no choice but to comply. He ordered his soldiers to retreat back to their positions around the hill, forming a perimeter so that Temujin's horses could not break through. Temujin praised Guo Jing for his bravery and told him to tie the captive's hands behind his back with his belt. Sengum sent 3 messengers in succession to negotiate. The Khan would be spared if he released Tusaka, but each time Temujin sent the messenger back with his ears sliced off. Because he's hard. And maybe a tad angry. Just a smidge. Deadlock. The sun edged down below the horizon. Fearing an attack once the light had faded, Temujin urged his men not to lose their focus. As midnight drew near, a man dressed in white approached the foot of the hill.
It's me, Jamuka. I wish to speak with my sworn brother, Temujin.
"Come up," the great Khan replied. His pace was slow at first, but once he caught sight of Temujin's commanding figure at the top, he started to run as if to embrace him. But Temujin drew his sword from his belt and called, "You consider me your sworn brother still?" Jamuka sighed and sat down cross-legged on the grass.
Brother, he said, you are already a tribal chief. Why do you insist on uniting the Mongols?
"What is your opinion?" Temujin replied.
The clan chiefs all say our ancestors have lived this way for hundreds of years. Why does Temujin want to change our traditions? The heavens will not allow it.
"Do you remember the story of our ancestor, Lady Alankoa? Her 5 sons could not live in peace, so she invited them to come and dine with her. She gave them each an arrow and asked them to break it. This they did with ease. Then she tied together another 5 arrows and asked them to break them. Each son tried, but none was able to do it. Do you remember what she said to them?"
Apes together, strong. If each of you stands alone, you will be broken as easily as an arrow, Jamuka said quietly. But if united, no one and nothing can break you.
"And then what happened?"
They joined together and conquered the steppe for future generations. They were the founders of our tribes.
"Exactly that. We too are heroes, fit to stand beside Lady Alankoa's sons. So why fight among ourselves? Why not unite and destroy the Jin?"
But the Jin command a powerful army. Their lands are scattered with gold, and they live among mountains of rice. How can the Mongols defeat them?
"So you prefer to live under their yoke?" Temujin snorted.
We are not oppressed by them. Their emperor made you queller of northern uprisings.
"I trusted them at first, that is true. But then I came to understand their greed. Every year they demand more. First they were satisfied with sheep and cows. Then they wanted horses, and now they want our men. What do we care for their war with the Song? Even if we help the Jin conquer the south, the land will belong to them alone. We lose soldiers, and for what? Are we going to feed our cattle on the sand on the other side of these mountains? If we fight the Jin."
But Ong Khan and Sengum don't want to betray them.
"Betray them? Ha! What about you?"
Brother, I beg you, don't let your anger cloud your thoughts. Let Tusaka go. I guarantee personally that Sengum will release you.
"Sengum? I don't trust him, and now I don't trust you."
Sengum said himself, if a son dies, a man may produce more sons. But there can only be one Temujin. If you don't let Tusaka go, you will not live to see the sun rise tomorrow.
Temujin knew the 2 men well. They would certainly have him killed. If Ong Khan had been leading the attack, he might have had a chance. He drew his sword again and flashed it above him. "Temujin never surrenders. Temujin dies only in battle." Jamuka rose to his feet.
You surrendered in the past when you were weaker than you are now. You give the spoils of war to your soldiers, telling them it belongs to them, not to the whole tribe. In this, again, the clan leaders say you do wrong. It is against our traditions.
But it pleases my young fighters. The clan leaders claim they cannot keep it because they want it for themselves. Such traditions make the fighters angry. Who do we need more? Brave soldiers or greedy, stupid clan leaders?
Brother, you have always acted alone, as if you didn't need the help or advice of the other clan leaders. You have also been sending messengers to persuade my soldiers to surrender and join you, promising them riches, that the livestock won't be shared among all the people of the tribe. Did you think I was blind to what you have been doing?
Now you know that, we can never be reconciled, Temujin thought to himself. He removed a small pouch from inside his shirt and threw it at Jamuka. Jamuka. The gifts you gave me on 3 separate occasions we swore our loyal... Oh, I see. One sec. The gifts you gave me on the 3 separate occasions we swore our loyalty to each other. Have them back. That way, when you cut your blade here, he said, drawing his finger across his neck, you will be killing your enemy and not your brother. He paused, sighed, and continued. I am a hero. You are a hero. The step may be vast, but it's not big enough for 2 such as us. Jamuka picked up the bag, reached for his own, and placed it in silence at Temujin's feet. He then turned and walked back down the hill. Temujin watched as he left. He stood for a long time without saying anything. He then took up Jamuka's bag and tipped out the stones and arrowheads of their childhood. He still remembered the games they had played. He then scratched a hole in the dirt with a dagger and buried his brother's gifts. Guo Jing stood beside him. He understood the significance of the moment. Temujin was burying his most precious friendship. The great Khan stood up and looked out at the scene below. As far as the eye could see, Sengum and Jamuka's men had lit fires. It was as if the stars in the sky were being reflected across the grasslands. He turned to Guo Jing. Are you afraid? I was thinking about my ma, Guo Jing answered. You are a brave fighter, an excellent fighter. He pointed to the fires. And so are they. We Mongols have so many brave men, but all we seem to do is fight and kill each other. If we were united, he said, looking out to the horizon, we could make all the world's grasslands ours. Temujin's words stirred Guo Jing's heart, and he felt his admiration for him grow. Great Khan, we will never be defeated by a coward like Sengum. Exactly. Remember those words, Temujin said with a smile. If we survive this, you will forever be a son to me. He leaned down and embraced the young man. The sun was starting to climb in the sky, and the enemy horns began echoing around the plain. It doesn't look like help will be coming, Temujin said eventually. I don't expect to make it down from here alive. Among the blasts of horns, sounds of weapons clanging and neighing horses drifted up on the wind. A dawn attack. Great Khan, my horse is swift. Why don't you ride it back and get help? We will hold them off. We won't surrender. Temujin smiled and stroked the young man's neck. If I, Temujin, were capable of abandoning my friends and generals in order to save myself, I would not be the Khan you see before you. You are right, Great Khan. I was wrong. Temujin, his 3 sons, and his officers and soldiers all took their positions behind the mounds of earth they had piled up the previous day. Bows were aimed and ready. Before long, 3 men broke free of the enemy ranks and approached under Sengum's yellow banner, followed by 4 soldiers on foot, dressed in black. Sengum on the left, Jamuka on the right, and there in the middle, the 6th prince of the Jin, Wanyan Honglie. He wore a suit of armor made of gold and carried an equally resplendent shield on his arm. Temujin, how dare you betray the Jin Empire? Temujin's eldest son, Jochi, shot an arrow at the prince, but one of their retinue leaped up and caught it. Bring me Temujin! Wanyan Honglie shouted. The black-clad foot soldiers began running up the hill at an unusual speed. Guo Jing watched in amazement. They were using Qinggong lightness kung fu. These were no ordinary fighters from the steppe. Jebe, Bogurchi, and the others began firing arrows, but the men skipped between them. Our men are brave and strong, to be sure, Guo Jing said to himself, but they cannot compete with such accomplished masters of the martial arts. What are we going to do? One of the men made it to the top. Ogadai tried to block him with his saber, but just as the man in black raised his arm, Guo Jing struck out at his wrist. He stumbled back 3 steps and looked up at the young, sturdy man shielding Ogadai. Who are you? He said in Chinese, unable to conceal his surprise at finding such an excellent swordsman among Temujin's men. Tell me your name. My name is Guo Jing. I've never heard of you. Surrender! Guo Jing glanced around him and saw the other 3 men in black had also reached the top, and were engaged in hand-to-hand combat with Chila Un, Bogurchi, and the others. Again he thrust his sword at the first man, who blocked and returned with all his weight. Just as Sengum's soldiers were preparing to follow behind up the hill, Mukali placed the point of his blade on the back of Tusaka's neck. Come any closer and I'll kill him. Your Highness, Sengum said, turning toward Wanyan Honglie, instruct your men to retreat. We will find another way. My son must not be hurt. Don't worry, he will be fine, Wanyan Honglie said with a smile. In fact, he was hoping Temujin would kill the young man and thereby cement a lasting hatred between the tribes, thus preventing them from ever uniting. Sengum's soldiers froze, but the prince's men in black kept fighting. Guo Jing made use of the techniques of the Yue Maiden's sword Jade Han had taught him. His opponent possessed considerable internal strength, but Guo Jing's sword was swift, and it swooped and flicked around the man's body. He was visibly flustered. Having seen off several of Temujin's men, the man in black's 3 companions ran over. One rushed forward with a spear. Elder brother, let me help. Stay where you are and admire your brother's technique instead, the first man countered. Guo Jing dropped his knee and raised his elbow in a soaring phoenix rising dragon, flicking his blade upward as he did so. The man lurched back, but the blade tore through his sleeve. Who is your master? The man shouted, breaking away from immediate danger. What brings you here, to the northern steppe? Guo Jing maintained a defensive stance and answered in the dialect of the rivers and lakes as his masters had taught him. I am a disciple of the 7 heroes of the south, and may I ask it is with whom I am conversing? Yes, that is what it says. And may I ask it is with whom I am conversing? Whatever. He managed to stutter. Well, we get there. It's deliberately awkward. Got it. He had been practicing such polite phrases for some time now, but this was his first chance to make use of them, and his nerves had garbled them. The man with the saber glanced at his martial brothers. What would be the point of telling you who we are? Your ancestors will never know. At this, he thrust his blade forward. Guo Jing knew the extent of their power, having already engaged them in combat, but the sophistication of the moves Jade Han, his 7th Shifu, had taught him was such that he was not merely on the defensive. The man with the saber struck at Guo Jing's lower body in a search the sea, behead the dragon. 30 thrusts of their weapons passed in quick succession. He was growing nervous, and his moves were becoming more erratic. He made a lunge at Guo Jing's middle. Guo Jing twisted and flexed his blade in a pick the fruit, rolling on the ground before aiming at his arm. The young man isn't defending himself, the man in black thought. This is my chance. Before your sword can reach me, I will have cut you in two. But Guo Jing knew what he was doing. Using his Negong inner strength, he dodged the blade with only the slightest movement of his wrist. He then thrust his sword toward the man's heart. The man screamed, dropped his saber, and knocked Guo Jing's sword away with his hand. He was just in time. The tip only penetrated his flesh half an inch. More devastating was the cut to his hand, which was gushing blood. He jumped back. As Guo Jing bent down to pick up the man's weapon, he heard a rush of air behind him. Without turning, Guo Jing kicked back, knocked the spear away, and followed with the saber. The second man in black shrank back, and Guo Jing stepped forward, performing a seize the basket by the handle. The moment his palm touched the spear, he could sense that this opponent was much slower than the first. He easily twisted and grabbed hold of it with his left hand, before sliding his blade down the shaft with his right. The man let go as the saber swept to within inches of his fingers. Guo Jing was buoyed. He cast the saber down the slope he cast the saber down the slope below and took hold of the spear. The third man howled and came running at him with two short axes. Guo Jing had studied spear technique with his sixth Shifu, and in that moment all the eccentric moves he had been taught flashed before him. He feigned a moment of weakness, to his opponent's delight. The man cried out and lurched forward. But moments later he was doubled over in pain as Guo Jing's foot jabbed into his stomach. The force sent him hurtling back, and the axes he was holding ricocheted toward his head. The axe was knocked away just in time. An iron whip. The last remaining man in black. The last remaining man in black. Sparks flashed, the axe flew one way, and the man landed with a thump on the ground. It took him some time to realize what had just happened. Then, with a roar, he reached for the axe head and leaped up again. 3 clashes later, and Guo Jing's weapon was in 2 pieces. He had no choice now but to use bare hand seizes blade kung fu to defend himself. Shouts came from further down the hill. The soldiers were watching in indignation. For 2 men to fight a lone unarmed opponent was an insult to any basic code of combat. Guo Jing may have been their enemy, but somehow they found themselves cheering him on. Bogurchi and Jebe had been watching, and could stand it no longer. They drew their sabers and hurled themselves into the fray, as did the other man in black. Temujin's men were formidable on the battlefield, where their bravery knew no bounds, but they were not practiced in the intricacies of one-on-one combat with members of the Wulin. After a minute or so, their weapons had been knocked away, and they were forced to retreat. Guo Jing leaped to defend Bogurchi, striking his palm against the spine of one of the men. He answered by slicing his blade at Guo Jing's wrist. Guo Jing retracted his hand and jabbed his elbow into another who was attacking Jebe. The men in black were now focused on one goal only, to kill Guo Jing. They were not interested in the 2 Mongolian generals, and closed in on the boy. Below, the soldiers cheered louder, and their insults grew even uglier, but the men in black paid them no heed. One picked up his spear. Saber, spear, whip, and axe. Guo Jing's eyes darted between them. His only weapon was his lightness kung fu as he danced between the blades.
You can see how, the entirety of Hong Kong martial arts cinema owes its very existence to this series. The entire visual identity is blow for blow exactly the same as this. To say this was influential would be a grave understatement. Anyway. Where were we? Guo Jing held them off for at least 20 moves before the saber sliced his arm. Blood was now pumping out onto his clothes.
Just then a tumult broke out below, and 6 of Sengum's men broke free from their ranks and began running up the hill. Assuming they were yet more of Wanyan Honglie's men coming to join the attack against Guo Jing, the soldiers jeered and cursed. Temujin's men at the top aimed their arrows.
Wait, it's the freaks of the south, Jebe called out. Your Shifus have come, Guo Jing.
So exhausted he could barely see, Guo Jing was overcome with relief and rallied his spirits. Zhu Kong and Gildan Quan were the first to arrive, and the danger their student was in was instantly apparent. Gildan Quan launched himself forward and blocked all 4 weapons with his scales.
Shameless dogs!
Their hands trembled from the force, and the men in black knew at once they were dealing with a more accomplished fighter. They backed away, allowing Zhu Kong to check Guo Jing's wounds. Within moments, the other freaks had joined them. The man with the saber understood the situation had changed, and they would most likely be defeated. But it would be a considerable loss of face if they retreated back down the hill. How could they continue to serve the 6th prince?
The 6 freaks of the south?
That is correct, Zhu Kong smiled.
And who, may I ask, are you?
We are disciples of the Dragon King, master of the demon sect.
The freaks had not been expecting this. The men in black had been willing to fight 4 against 1. Such a violation of the code of the Wu Lin had led them to assume they were rogue bandits without a master. But contrary to appearances, their Shifu was one of the most well-respected fighters of the South, Dragon King Hector Shaw. Yes, his name is Hector. I assume Hector as in someone who is a Hector, as opposed to the name Hector. The definition of a Hector is... to hector someone is to bully them, basically. So, Hector Shaw. Imagine having a title, he is the Dragon King bullying Shaw. So, good time. Kinda says everything you need to know about him. Or braggart, perhaps. Anyway, occasionally, we stop our flow briefly in order to get word definitions. Okay, how much longer is this chunk going to go on? Because this is... Oh, good, we're almost done. My throat's starting to give out. Oh, sorry, I did that with the mic on. My bad.
We are disciples of the Dragon King, master of the demon sect.
Oh, we did that. The freaks had not been expecting this. These men in black had been willing to fight 4 against 1. Such a violation of the code of the Wu Lin had led them to assume that they were rogue bandits without a master. But contrary to appearances, their Shifu was one of the most well-respected fighters of the South, Dragon King Hector Shaw.
How dare you abuse the Dragon King's good name? How could such a patriotic and brave master have disciples as low down and contemptible as you?
Keijene's voice was as icy as the northern wind.
Abuse his good name?
The man with the axe said, holding his free hand against his stomach where Guo Jing had kicked him.
That man you dare to chastise is Shen the Strong. This is my 2nd brother, Wu the Bold, and my 3rd brother, Ma the Valiant, and I am Chan the Hardy.
It appears you are telling the truth, Keijene said. The 4 demons of the Yellow River. With such a reputation in the Wu Lin, why lower yourselves to fight 4 against 1? 4 against 1? Your student fights with the Mongols. It is we who are outnumbered.
This was Wu the Bold.
3rd brother, Chan whispered, turning to Ma. Who is this pompous blind fool?
But Keijene had heard him, and he was enraged by the insult. He tapped his staff on the ground and launched himself forward, grabbing Chan by the collar and throwing him back down the hill. The other demons of the Yellow River were momentarily paralyzed with fear, and within seconds they had been similarly discharged. The soldiers above and below were cheering now. Covered in sand and flushed with embarrassment, the four men staggered to their feet. They had been lucky. Had the ground been harder, they would have broken many bones. At Okay, so as is tradition, in order to give our hero a boost, basically they threw him against four total jobbers. Theoretically, they're skilled, but as we'll learn later, they're actually nothing, and in fact, they're a massive embarrassment to their master. We'll learn that like the character introduction thing already kind of explains that, but we'll get more into that later. I believe we'll get into that actually the next chunk or the chunk after. So chapter, sorry, not chunk. Soldiers above were cheering now. At that, oh yes, they had been lucky. Had the ground been harder, they would have broken many bones. At that moment, shouts rose up as plumes of dirt clouded the horizon. A murmur spread through Sengum's ranks as the front line made ready. These were Temujin's reinforcements. The great Khan was much relieved, and their arrival gave him the confidence to proceed with the fight. Temujin pointed in the direction of Sengum's left flank. "Take that side first." Jebe, Bogurchi, Jochi, and Chagatai led the charge. Shouts came up on the wind from the relief troops. Mukali held Tusaka in his arms and placed his blade against the young man's neck.
Let me through! Let me through!
Sengum was about to send men to intercept the attack when he caught sight of his son in the general's grip. This moment of hesitation allowed Temujin's best men to descend the hill. Jebe aimed an arrow at Sengum's head and released. Sengum ducked, but the arrow caught him in the cheek and he fell from his horse. With their commander-in-chief injured, Sengum's men scattered. Temujin began the next charge, and thousands of Jamuka's soldiers rode forward to meet it, their ranks thinned by the arrows that followed the Khan. Temujin knew Jamuka to be a skilled commander, with an army to match. Sengum was mediocre in comparison, and was merely protected by a powerful father. Some miles in the distance, Tolui was approaching, riding a large globe of dust. Tolui had in fact struggled to get the generals to come with him after being left alone by his father and three older brothers back at the camp. He was young and did not carry his father's seal, so had come with only a few thousand younger soldiers. Concerned that his return would not have the desired impact, Tolui conceived of a most ingenious idea. They would tie branches to the tails of their horses, therefore creating a mighty display on the horizon. It worked. Hey, psychological warfare, good stuff. Ong Khan's army had always revered Temujin, and now they saw he had yet more reinforcements on the way. His men, Jamukas, and the remnants of Sengum's turned and fled. With the enemy forces now scattered, Temujin's army could return to their camp, encountering Kojin and a small company of soldiers on the way. Oh, no worries, Optical Antenna. Thanks for tuning in. And hello, Warren. Thanks for tuning in as well. To you. Words. 3. That evening, Temujin held a banquet to reward his men. But to his party's indignation, Tusaka was placed in the seat of honor. 3 toasts to Tusaka, the great Khan called out. I owe a debt of gratitude as mighty as any mountain to my father Ong Khan and my brother Sengum, who have always treated me with such kindness. There is no reason for hate to spread between our families. I now beg for forgiveness for my wrongs and present my father and brother with the finest gifts I possess. I bear no grudge in my heart for all that you have done, and in return I will prepare my daughter for marriage. Together we will host a sumptuous feast for all the tribal chiefs. Tusaka, you will be my son-in-law, and thus my son. From this day forward, our families must be united, and never let ourselves be divided by plots and discord. Tusaka, relieved just to still be alive, nodded his agreement. But throughout his speech, Temujin had been clutching at his chest and coughing. Could Temujin Khan be injured? He wondered. Today, the Khan began, as if hearing his question, I was hit by an arrow. It may take me many weeks to recover, otherwise I would accompany you back myself. He pulled out his hand from under his robes, and it was smeared with bright red blood. Do not wait to get married. I fear it will take too long. Temujin's officers had watched the scene unfold with increasing outrage. Why was he in such a hurry to marry Kojin to Tusaka? It made him look scared and weak before Ong Khan. One of his commanders had lost a son in the defense of the hill. Enraged by what he was hearing, he drew his saber and ran at Tusaka. Temujin stepped in, dragged him outside, and, with the crowd as his witness, beat him 30 times with his club until the commander fainted from the loss of blood. Lock him up. On the 3rd day, he and his family will be beheaded. Temujin then fell to the ground in pain. Hello, Chadiculus. Thanks for tuning in. Via Twitch, I think, if my software is reading that correctly, or I am reading the icon correctly. Thank you for tuning in. The next day, Temujin sent Tusaka home with 2 carts of gold and furs. 1,000 plump sheep, 100 of the finest battle horses, and an escort of 50 soldiers. He also included in the retinue one of his most eloquent men, who would beg forgiveness of Ong Khan and Sengum. When the time came for them to leave, Temujin was too weak to ride his horse, and so bid a frail farewell from his stretcher. 8 days after Tusaka's departure, Temujin called his officers together. Gather your men and make ready. We are going to attack Ong Khan. Temujin's commanders were shocked. Ong Khan's army is larger than ours, Temujin continued. The only way for us to beat them is to take them by surprise. The gifts and the wound were all a ruse to throw them off guard. They were impressed by the Khan's cunning. Temujin then ordered the commander he had beaten and imprisoned be set free, and bestowed on him a handsome reward. The commander was delighted to hear of the great Khan's plan, and knelt to express his gratitude and beg for the honor of leading the attack. His request was granted. Temujin divided his army into 3 columns, and together they set off under the cover of darkness, using little-known trails through mountain valleys. Shepherds they met along the way were forced to join them, so that no word of the attack could precede them. Ong Khan and Sengum had indeed feared Ong Khan and Sengum had indeed feared retribution by Temujin, and had maintained vigilance at first. But when Tusaka returned with so many great treasures, a simpering ambassador, and news of Temujin's wound, they were reassured. Guards were recalled, and time was given over to feasting with the 6th prince of the Jin and Jamuka. How were they to know that a force was coming that would shatter the ground beneath them? Temujin's army arrived while the sky was dark, and the raid sent panic through the camp. Such was their surprise that Ong Khan's men barely put up a fight. Ong Khan fled west, as did Sengum, where they were later killed by the Naiman and Liao respectively. Tusaka was trampled in the confusion. Wanyan Honglie escaped under the protection of the 4 demons of the Yellow River and made for the Jin capital. Abandoned by his soldiers, Jamuka took 5 bodyguards and made his way to Tangnu Mountain. Tangnu. Tangnu Mountain. But they set upon him while he was eating his mutton, and delivered him straight to Temujin. Temujin, however, was furious. "You betrayed your commander? How can I let you live?" They were then decapitated, with Jamuka as a witness. "Brother, should we make peace?"
I cannot face you or the world after what I have done, Jamuka replied, tears soaking his cheeks. I can only ask my sworn brother that you let me die without bleeding, so that my soul will stay with my body.
Temujin was quiet. "I will grant your request," he said at length, "and you will be buried where we used to play as children." Jamuka knelt before the Khan, who turned and left. He ordered his men crush his brother with something heavy, and be sure not to let him bleed. Okay. Now there was no one left among the Mongols who could match Temujin's power. He called the tribes together on the banks of the Onon River, and brought the various armies under his command. Most of the men gathered that day submitted to his authority, and he was given the title of Great Khan of all Mongolia, Genghis Khan, to rule with the strength of all the seas. The Great Khan rewarded his most deserving men, the 4 great generals, Bukali, Bogurchi, Borokul, and Chilaun, while his officers Jebe, Jelme, and Subotai were promoted to the same rank. Guo Jing's outstanding bravery during the battle did not go unnoticed, and he too was made a general. Not yet 20, he was to stand among such excellent men and call them his equal. As they drank and ate, the Great Khan's soldiers came in turn to toast and drink with him. Once merry, Temujin turned to Guo Jing and said, "Boy, I have one more gift for you. It is my most precious possession." Guo Jing knelt down as a gesture of gratitude. "To you I give my eldest daughter, Kojin. When the sun rises tomorrow, you shall be known as the Prince of the Golden Blade." The generals and soldiers whooped and cheered and began chanting, "Hail the Great Khan's son, Prince of the Golden Blade!" Tolui was overjoyed as he locked his sworn brother in a tight embrace. But Guo Jing was in a daze. To him, Kojin had always been like a little sister. He felt no other kind of love toward her. His youth had been devoted to the study of the martial arts, and he had given no thought to romance. Panic rose within him at the Khan's words. He's such a dork. Oh, Guo Jing, what sights and experiences we shall have through you. Guo Jing, we will learn, is a goober. He is a bit of a dip, especially when it comes to womenfolk. This is not the first time that he is going to be a little petrified. Spoilers. Minor spoilers. Very. Everyone saw his dumbstruck expression and laughed. Once the banquet was over, Guo Jing went to report the news to his mother. Lily Li was silent for some time before instructing her son to invite the 6 freaks to speak with her. The freaks congratulated Lily Li on her son being thus honored, but she said nothing in reply, and instead fell to her knees and kowtowed. "Auntie, please get up," they said. "Why so formal?" Jade Han helped her to her feet.
I must thank the 6 heroes. It is due to your training that my son has become a man, Lily Li said. Words cannot do justice to my gratitude, but now I have a problem and I need your advice.
She then told the freaks about the marriage agreed by her late husband and his sworn brother, Ironheart Yang.
It is an honor to my family that the Great Khan wants my son to be united with his, she said. But if Brother Yang's wife gave birth to a daughter, and I don't keep my husband's promise, I will not be able to face them in the next world.
"Don't worry about that, Auntie," Zhu Kong said with a smile. "Ironheart Yang's wife gave birth to a boy."
How do you know that, Master Zhu?
she said in astonishment. A friend of ours in the Central Plains wrote us a letter. He wishes us to take Guo Jing south to meet Yang's son to compare their kung fu. All these years, 18 years, by the way, 18 years. 18! 18 years! All these years, the six freaks had never told Lily Li or Guo Jing about their bet with Qiu Chuji, avoiding Guo Jing's questions about the Taoist harmony yin. They had realized that Guo Jing would be unable to fight Yang Kang to the best of his abilities if he knew the whole story. Zhu Kong's words excited Lily Li. She asked after Ironheart's wife, Charity Bao, and for any other news that they had about the boy. But the freaks could give her no answer. They would take Guo Jing south to meet the young man. If they could find Justice Duan along the way, so much the better. Then Guo Jing would come back and marry Kojin. Guo Jing went to report their decision to Genghis Khan. "While you're there, bring me back the head of the sixth prince of the Jin, Wanyan Honglie," Temujin said. "It's all his fault that my sworn brother Jamuka betrayed me and lost his life. How many men do you need?" Having unified the Mongols, Genghis Khan was now a serious threat to the Jin Empire. Confrontation was inevitable. Having met Wanyan Honglie on several occasions, Temujin knew that he was intelligent and must be dealt with as soon as possible. Of course, the true reasons for his rift with Jamuka were not so simple. Temujin had overturned centuries of tradition and actively appealed to Jamuka's men to join him. Their oath of loyalty was already broken, even if he preferred to place the blame on outside forces. Guo Jing had grown up on his mother's stories of the evil deeds of the Jin, and his battle with the four demons of the Yellow River had only reinforced his hatred. "If I take my 6 Shifus, I'm sure we can succeed," he mused. But soldiers with no knowledge of the martial arts would only be a hindrance. He looked up to the Khan and answered, "I will travel with my Shifus. I don't need any more men." "As you wish. We are still weak and cannot yet take on the Jin directly. You mustn't let them know of our intentions." Guo Jing nodded. The Khan then gave him 10 ingots of gold for the journey, and offered the 6 freaks some of the treasure recovered during the defeat of Ong Khan. Guo Jing's Mongolian friends also offered him gifts. "Brother," Tolui said, "people in the south are clever and not to be trusted. Be careful." 3 days later, Guo Jing and the freaks went to visit the grave of Zhang Asheng and pay their respects. They then returned to say goodbye to Lily Li, before heading out on the south road. Lily Li watched the silhouette of her son on his horse disappear over the horizon. She recalled his birth on that snowy battlefield and felt a twinge in her heart. After some 10 li, Guo Jing spotted 2 white condors high above them, and moments later Tolui and Kojin came riding up to bid them farewell. Tolui gave Guo Jing a fine black fur coat taken from Ong Khan's treasure store. Kojin knew of her father's decision, and she looked on in silence, her cheeks flushed. "Say something, sister," Tolui urged. "I'm not listening." He laughed and moved away. Kojin bowed her head and paused. "Come back soon." She looked up at him again. Guo Jing nodded. "Was there anything else?" She shook her head. "Then I have to go." She did not move. Guo Jing approached and took her awkwardly in his arms. He rode over to Tolui and embraced him too. With a kick to his horse, he then rode off to catch up with the freaks, who by this time were some way ahead. Kojin was much vexed by Guo Jing's stiff and cold goodbye. He had shown not even the slightest tenderness or sign of love. She cracked her whip hard, staining her horse's beautiful white coat with specks of fresh blood, and sped back to the camp. And that will do it for this week. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Oh, wait, we have appendix stuff. One sec. Scoodly doodly doo bop bop. Where did we leave off? there. Oh, we only have one this week, I think. Yeah, we did Ulan last week, which is Mongolian for red. This week's appendix item is Let Me Die Without Bleeding. This story, and specifically Jamuka's request, comes from The Secret History of the Mongols, the oldest known literary work in Mongolian, written after Genghis Khan's death in 1227. The oldest surviving examples of the text are all transcribed into Chinese, however, and date from the 14th century as part of a history of the Mongol Yuan dynasty. That's pretty cool. Alrighty, so that will do it for this week. Thanks again to everyone who tuned in. Hopefully you enjoyed, even though I am definitely stumbling on a lot of the names. We're getting better, though. I feel we're getting pretty good. Except when they jump me with like 7 new names in a row. At which point I'm like, panic! Panic! So yeah. As we can see, our boy Guo Jing is decidedly coming of age. He's getting quite a bit better at this whole kung fu thing, and all it took was learning how to sleep good. All it took was learning how to sleep and breathe, and a few other things subtly being taught to him. Alrighty, so yeah. Next week we'll have more of A Hero Born. We're about 2/3 of the way through, give or take. About 2/3. And yeah. This is but the first of 4 volumes of the Legends of the Condor Heroes. After this, I have something. After we get through the book, I have something cute planned. That'll be 1 or 2 weeks, and then we'll figure out what we're doing at that point. Because I haven't decided what I'm going to do next. I don't know that I'm going to permanently convert this into a Wuxia thing. I kind of want it to still stay a kind of a do whatever day for Wednesdays. But we'll see. I mean, between the 4 volumes and 1 or 2 other things I've got floating around, I could probably make the rest of the year that with minimal difficulty. But I do other streams throughout the week if you're tuning in after the fact or are tuning in now and want to know or care. I do a Monday stream. I stream Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays starting at about noon Eastern Standard Time, which I realize is a bizarre time to do it, but it's the time I have free. Usually go about 2 hours and change, sometimes 3. Usually not super long. Mondays are Mecha Mondays. I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. Right now we're reading the second story in the science fiction double feature, Waldo and Magic Incorporated. Waldo is the mecha adjacent one. Magic Incorporated is just kind of interesting world building exercise, both by Robert Heinlein. And Fridays are Free Read Fridays, where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud. We just got done reading through the Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons. If you want a massive, sprawling space opera encompassing 2 volumes with a vibrant cast of characters, I highly recommend you check that out. As always, if you liked any of these and want to hear an actual professional do it, I highly recommend seeking out actual professional audiobook readers, as well as getting a copy of the book yourself. Always worthwhile. This Friday, I'll be continuing to read short stories from the short story collection titled Instantiation by Greg Egan. Longtime listeners know I have a fanish. I'm a Greg Egan fan, so we'll be doing that. Yeah. I forget which story we have up next. We'll see. I'll find out. And we'll get to it. Anyway, thanks again for tuning in. I got a dip. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. It's what it's the code of the Wu Lin, man. Aren't you going to become a martial artist? Yes? You must have honor. Go one-on-one. Don't do this four-on-one bull, Pucky. Don't do that. It's not cool. Anyway, until next week. Well, next time, whenever you tune in. Have a good one. Oh, everything I've done previously is all up on the YouTube channel. It should be in the stream description. So feel free to check out that. I just updated this past weekend the playlists, so those are all properly organized up until uh, before this Monday, whichever date that was. April. No, sorry. May. Was that May 1st? May 6th, sorry. I know math. Yep. All right. Anyway, I gotta go. Have a good one.